Well, there's limitations of any research. I think by definition, we hope that we can improve anything we do. What's the point of doing any research if you can't improve it? And it is a model, it's an algorithm. I'm going to start off with some upside because I think people are going to look at it and say, wow, 6 variables, where's this, and this? And I do want you to know that these 6 remain significant and the best predictors even after accounting for all those other variables. So you might say things like, whoa, where's the level of fear? And we're going to say, and you may see that as a limitation, but fear was so highly correlated with emotions, and that's one of the variables in the model that, it's the reason why it was dropped from the model. There were other variables such as, let's see, I mentioned source credibility before. I also mentioned, you could think about where's message strength. You could have weak messages or really strong messages, or you could have what we call one-sided versus two-sided messages, and that's missing from the model, and that's a limitation. So what do we mean by one- and two-sided messages? One-sided messages are where you're only talking about the upside of engaging in health behavior. Two-sided messages are where you're talking about upside, but also some of the trouble that people might have following the behavior. And it's much more realistic. I mean, most of us are familiar with the advantages of engaging in good behavior, and yet we don't. That's because it's hard to do it. And so a two-sided message would be something like, we know it's really, really hard, right? And still, encourage people. Or you might say, for example, there may be some side effects, or this may not be good for everyone, right? And that's an example of a two-sided message. So that, again, originally was in the model, but now isn't in the model because, again, it was not the strongest predictor of the model. So we wanted something that was simple, something that was effective, but yet, of course, that meant that we couldn't include everything in the model. We didn't want people in the health communication world to have to collect a lot of information or make it really hard for them to choose when they were designing their communications. And that could be seen as a limitation, but we see it as a more user-friendly model. Well, let's talk about some other limitations. One, I think it's really, really important to understand it's a model. It's not a substitute for thinking. No model is a substitute for thinking. You want to use the model in context. You're going to have some priors. A lot of people who use this model have a lot of experience. You want to use it as one input. You want to see, is this consistent with your gut? Is this consistent with what you would have predicted would happen? Now, sometimes, if it's not, that's a good thing, because it tells you that maybe there's a different way of doing this, and it's worth testing to see if a different approach will get you better results. But in other cases where it is consistent with your gut, there's nothing to worry about. It's not like, it's either the gut or the model is not useful anymore, because they're both useful. You get convergent validity. If it converges and you've got 4 different things telling you to go the same way, you're much more confident of that than if you've got 4 things telling you to go in different ways. So that's, I think, something else that I would consider as a limitation in some ways, as in, if you just use the model and say, okay, I don't have to think about stuff anymore. I don't have to, worry about, how I design my communication anymore. I'm just going to plug it in. I see it more as complementary rather than as a substitute. The third big limitation, I think, is that we don't have as many individual differences and contextual variables as we would like. We were restricted based on the data that we had. Oh, I want to add, and also we don't have as much global data as we would like. It's very US-centric. It's also more younger than we would like. We know that the population is aging and is reaching almost 7 billion now, and we would love to have a sample size, love to have a sample that really incorporated more of the seniors in our aging population. It is also, and with regard to the contextual variables, I think it's really, really important that we start incorporating field studies that have many things going on, but yet can isolate the effect of the health communications. So just look, even within health communications, you have lots of different things, right? You have what is said, how it's said, right? The different medium that you're using to communicate or disseminate the information, right? Who is providing the message, so does it say CDC, does it say teacher, does it say Surgeon General, who is the key source that's providing the information? And I would love for all of those different message tactics to be included. So social media, it would be fantastic to have a media variable, right? And say, are we using Facebook? Are we using blogs? Are we using Twitter? Are we using Ning? What are the different ways in which we are communicating and testing this information? And we don't have that currently. Individual differences, we at this point, we had to split our sample into Caucasian, non-Caucasian. Now look at me, I am not just going to say I'm non-Caucasian. We have so many different types of ethnicities and subcultures, and it would be great if they were represented in the model. So it would be fantastic if we could get new data that targeted American Indians or the Hispanic population or African Americans, et cetera, and actually looked at the effectiveness of the model amongst those different audiences, rather than just Caucasian, non-Caucasian, or white, non-white. So those are some examples of the data limitations. So the first set of limitations was related to the model itself, just any model. The second have to do with some of the data limitations. And I think the third limitation may be related to the fact that the way the model is structured now, we require the user to code their own messages. So we'll try to make it as easy as possible to help you code this. We will have lots of guidelines for how to code it, but it could be seen as a limitation as compared to, for example, you just scan your communication in and it magically just fixes everything and spits out a new communication. Again, I don't really see it as a big limitation because I feel like it's a learning and growing process for all of us, that if we actually had to code it and think about it, the next time around, it would probably be easier for us to design a more effective communication even without using the model.